Why would anybody do a PhD, and what's the process for getting a PhD? Well, I got asked this question just recently because this is the first time I seriously thought about doing a doctorate. So I came away from that thinking, wow, okay. And I never thought of myself as an academic, so I always wondered if something like this would just be out of reach, unnecessary. So in this video, Frank and I are going to sit down together and talk about the PhD process, what it is, and kind of our experiences. We're both going through, well, Frank's finishing up his PhD program at a different seminary to me, and so we talk about the PhD process a little bit to explain how it works. So most of you won't ever be interested in doing a PhD, and that's totally fine. Nobody needs to do a PhD, but it is something that a number of people go through, and there are some reasons for that. And so in this video, we're going to talk about what some of those reasons are, and we're going to talk about what that process looks like. This is an interview style video between Frank and myself. Frank's currently going through his PhD, his A.B.D, which is all but dissertation. He's finished all of his classwork and now he's just doing that last little piece. And he started that, of course, that's well underway by this stage. He will be done fairly soon. For my part, I finished my dissertation a number of years ago, and so while it's not as fresh as it is for Frank, it's still a process which well, you never forget it.
As you know, I'm pursuing my PhD. I'm in the dissertation stage of my PhD, which they would call a PhD candidate. So, all but dissertation, as if that's just one little thing that you have to finish up at the end.
It's that phase that seems to drag on.
It's a huge chunk of work, right? So, and we'll talk more about the dissertation in a moment, but I wanted to kind of get your feelings, having gone through the process, having gone through an American seminary to get your PhD. Can you share with us what that process was? How did you get started, step by step, until you started working on that PhD?
Yeah, so I guess for me, I was already living in the States when I did my undergraduate and my master's degree while I was living in the US. And toward the end of that time, I went to the US. I thought I was going to become a pastor. So I went and did a Master of Divinity degree. And as I was finishing that up, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to have to start thinking about going home and pastoring a church. And so I talked to a friend of mine here in New Zealand who I thought might be interested in planting a church with me, because it's very, very difficult to get a pastoral role in New Zealand once you've got American training, or any training for that matter, it seems. But so I started to set up thinking through, how do I become how do I get to that point where I can get into a church. And so I thought, I'm going to have to plant a church. So I called a friend of mine. And I said to him, hey, I'm thinking about planting a church in your area, our area where I used to live. Would you be interested in joining me? And he said, well, I'll think about it. And so I thought, well, if my friends are only going to think about it, this is probably dead in the water to start with. So I ended up thinking, yeah, that's probably not the best thing to do. So it was that difficult issue of where do you go from this point? And, I think it was providential in many ways. But at that point, I did my undergraduate degree in biblical counseling, my Master of Divinity, and at that point, there was the ACBC conference came to the area where I was studying at the Master Seminary, so they had the ACBC conference that year at Grace Seminary, Grace Church, that's what it was, in California. And so I went to that, and while I was there, I got introduced to the guys doing the PhD in biblical counseling, and just talked to them a little bit. And then I went and talked to a friend of mine who's kind of a mentor in many ways, and those are important. Mentors are really, really important, by the way. And I said to him, look, I just came across this PhD idea of doing a doctorate in biblical counseling. What do you think? And he said, sit down. And he said to me, you know what? You should do this. This is an ideal thing for you to do. And we talked for a little bit about it. And so I came away with that, because this is the first time I seriously thought about doing a doctorate. So I came away from that thinking, wow, okay. And I never thought of myself as an academic, so I always wondered if something like this would just be out of reach, unnecessary, not really, So anyway, it was what it was. But anyway, so I applied. I was accepted. So the remarkable thing was that there was only 2 spots open for that doctoral program that year. And I went with a friend of mine who also went to the same seminary, who had better grades than me. And there were a bunch of others who came. We came for the examinations to be let in and all that kind of stuff. And they ended up, of the 5 or 7 of us, however many it was, who applied that year, they accepted 2 of us, and I was one of them for some unknown reason. So anyway, so that was kind of how I got into it, and then from there it started the following August. So this was taking place in about, I guess it was October. I found out about it. Then I went through the examination process, did the GRE exam, all that sort of stuff, got accepted, and then we had to go home because we're finishing my undergraduate, my master's degree. So we came home to New Zealand, but it was a modular program, so we could go back and forth. And so that's what I did for the next 3-4 years. Is every semester I'd go to the States, we do the classes during the semester, and then we'd finish up with a week of classes on campus, and a colloquium, and it was great fun. I really enjoyed it. So that was the process for me, and how I did it. What does it look for you, Frank, as somebody in the States, for yourself?
Well, I had a similar process, but I came to pursuing seminary and a seminary degree later in life. I had already had my undergraduate work was in computer science, and I've been a software developer for over 20 years. But I've been serving in the church in a lay capacity, teaching. But I got to the point within my church where people kind of started asking me, would you consider preaching sometimes? Not necessarily as a career change or anything, but would you they thought I was a good teacher, and would you consider preaching? Well, I started, considering that, and I take that role behind the pulpit very seriously. And I didn't really feel entirely qualified. So praying about it, I started looking into ways that I could go to seminary, but not uproot my family. I wasn't going to be able to do that. And so I did have the opportunity to attend Liberty University, and I attended Liberty University and got my Master of Divinity there, and followed that with a Master of Arts, both of which are in biblical languages. I really wanted to study the biblical languages, and the choices amongst other schools just wasn't there. Either they didn't offer biblical languages to that degree, or they weren't remote, and I wasn't going to be able to attend in person. So that really worked out well. The Lord blessed that for a number of years, and I succeeded. At first I thought, well, that's it, right? What else would I need, right? I wasn't necessarily intending to go into that PhD level. But the more I started looking into pastoral service versus academic side, since I have one master in each of those sides, right? Then I talked to some people that I knew, and regarding teaching the languages, I just love to teach the languages. And they said, you're probably, if that's serious, if you want to do that in this stage of your career, maybe into retirement, that kind of thing, if you want to do that, you're going to have to get a PhD. And so I looked around again and saw programs that were offered in that would accommodate me. Again, can't uproot my family. So how can I do this? It had to be a program that was accredited, qualified. I didn't want to be turned away by an organization or a mission board or a school that said, I'm sorry, that's not a real degree, that kind of thing. So the Lord led me to Columbia Biblical Seminary in Columbia, South Carolina. It has a good reputation, excellent faculty, and they offer the opportunity to study in Old Testament biblical studies. And so that's the route I prefer. I went down there. And so that's just the Lord putting all the pieces in place.
No, that's great. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, very cool. And so yours is how long is your degree what's the process for getting a doctorate at Columbia? How long does it take? What are the elements involved? That kind of thing.
Yeah. So at Columbia Biblical Seminary, the process is what they call a hybrid of the English model or the European model and the American model. Typically, the American model has you taking a number of classes over a 2 to 3 year period, uh, just like you would at a master's level, but a little more. Seminars, of course, seminars, colloquiums, that kind of thing, in helping you prepare your potential dissertation topic, helping you get your writing skills honed if they're not already there, helping you get your research abilities honed. Uh, and then after about 2 or 3 years of taking classes, then you start, then you do your research proposal. And if accepted, then you start your dissertation work. The European model or English model is slightly different. You don't have the upfront classes as much as you do in the American model. You pretty much come in already knowing what your dissertation is going to be, and you start work on that. So you can see many of the leading scholars in evangelical biblical studies today have done their master's level work here in the States, but they've gone to sometimes Oxford or Durham or other English universities to do their PhDs. Columbia offers a hybrid of that. There's basically 1 year of classes that you take to prepare you for the dissertation work, but you already come in with a proposal as part of the application process. Granted, it's not a very in-depth proposal, but it's in-depth enough that you kind of know the direction that you want to go, and then you'll so from the time you get there, you already have a good idea of what you want to study in your dissertation, and then 1 year of classes, and then you are down the road to your dissertation. You get a mentor to work with you, and that kind of thing. So it's a hybrid between the programs.
Yeah, it was the same as the program I was using as well at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. They use the same. I think pretty much all the American seminaries, as far as I know, anyway, use that hybrid model. I got to say, I really liked that hybrid model. One of the things I loved about my time doing the PhD was actually to go on campus, to have those classes, and some of them are pretty intense. You know, I remember one class in particular. It was on hermeneutics. And we had Hermeneutics in the Care of People was the name of the class. Dr. Jeremy Pierre ran that class. It was great. I loved Dr. Pierre. We had to read, I think it was something like 9 hermeneutics books or something like that over the period of the semester. And some of them are long. Like we had to read Kostenberger and Patterson's 800-page thing in a week, right? So you're reading one a week basically throughout the semester, writing a response to each one of them and evaluating them. And then you got another seminar going on at the same time. Then you got your colloquium at the same time. And it's easy to be reading 2 books a week without too much of a challenge. That week I had to read Kostenberger and Patterson. I read 1,400 pages that 1 week. It was a heavy reading week, but it was hugely rewarding. And then the evaluation of all of the different thinking, the process, the works, whatever it was, I really appreciated that. Yes, it was hard work, but the value in it I found really good. So I would, even though, like I've thought about doing a second doctorate, I'm not going to, my wife has forbidden it, but I have thought about doing it, and I'd probably do the English model here in New Zealand, maybe with Otago University, which is pretty much the only option we have here, but I'm not going to do it. Like I said, honey, if you're watching this, just no, I'm not going to do it. Yeah, and it would be interesting just to compare the no class to class based, no seminars to seminar based approach. So I really enjoyed the seminars that we had. The other thing we had too, which is probably, I'd be interested in yours on this. Given that yours is a language based program, Frank, you would have had to have done probably Latin and theological German as well. Is that right?
Well, technically, the program at Columbia Biblical Seminary, they offer a number of different programs at the PhD level. The program I'm in, the focus I'm in, is biblical studies. And they divide that up between New Testament biblical studies, Old Testament biblical studies. And in those divisions, one can emphasize, have an emphasis, for instance, on the biblical study side of it or a language side. So one of my cohort classmates is doing his in Greek. He's on the New Testament side, but he's doing his dissertation the topic is specifically related to a Greek language function.
Mm.
And so he's not necessarily studying a New Testament book or anything. It's specifically in Greek. And they allow that anywhere within the New Testament side. Same with the Old Testament side. If you want to study Hebrew in particular, you're allowed to do that within that biblical studies range. Or you can just do a study in a book. You don't need to focus on the language if you don't want to, but it's available to you.
Yeah. Yeah, so for our one, most of the doctoral programs at Southern do Latin or German as a
Oh,
requirement. But for biblical counseling, we had to do empirical research instead so that we could understand the process that would be used by scientists and those kinds of things. And we counted that as a language. But for the most part, most doctoral programs require additional languages. Of course, my
we
program
do.
also required
We
Greek
do.
and Hebrew as well.
I neglected to kind of finish answering the second part of your question, so
Mm.
my apologies. Yes, in fact, for the biblical studies program, we have to complete 2 foreign research languages as part of that program. Some of the other more practical programs don't have that requirement, or the theological program, I believe, has 1 language you have to do. The
Mm.
biblical studies program requires 2 foreign research languages that you need to meet competency on.
You don't have to do a PhD if you're interested in Greek and Hebrew. Frank and I teach Greek and Hebrew. That's what we do. If you're interested in learning Greek or Hebrew, go grab our starter pack at bma.to/starter pack, and we look forward to being a blessing to you and serving you there. Let's get back to it.
In addition to that, as you recall, I described the program split between Old Testament and New Testament. Immediately upon starting the program, the Old Testament biblical studies students are given a Hebrew proficiency exam,
Yeah.
and the New Testament biblical studies group is given a Greek proficiency exam from the very first week.
Yeah.
So you start the program having to prove your proficiency in the language.
Yeah.
Then, at different stages of the program, you have to show proficiency in research languages. I've already completed my first research language proficiency in German, and I will be doing my second one later on, probably next year. So, but that is a requirement as
Mhm.
well in our biblical studies program.
Yeah. Let's talk about comprehensive exams because that's something we haven't talked about yet. We talked about seminars and, well, we haven't really talked about colloquiums, but we'll talk about those in a minute too. But let's talk about the comprehensive exam, which is, for me, was I think it was a 4-hour closed book exam. And by closed book, no Bible, nothing.
Mm.
Um, and they basically, well, depending on so we had for our doctoral program, we had a major and a minor. So I majored in biblical counseling and I minored in biblical spirituality. And so for that reason, for my comprehensive exams, I had 2 questions, 2 hours each kind of thing, which I had to respond to. And so they give you an envelope for each of those, and you just, you split your time in half and away you go. So for biblical counseling, it was just 2 questions, and you had to write an essay response to it. They like it if you can quote books and page numbers and things like that in the footnotes as well. So there's a little bit of onus on you, and you don't know what they're going to ask. They give you, here's some of the kinds of questions you might get. No guarantee it'll be any of these, but or maybe it will be like one of these or something like that. And then for the biblical spirituality, I had no idea what to expect whatsoever. But that ended up being, I think, 1 question. So that was actually easier. And the question I got on that was actually related to my dissertation topic, union with Christ, the theology of union with Christ. So that was a really easy one. I could do that one well. But the biblical counseling one, man, that was a challenge. So that was it. 4 hours, closed book. All you have is your laptop or whatever it is, and you're not allowed to open anything else up. And once you finish, it's submitted, it's done, and you walk away. Is that similar to your process, Frank?
No, thankfully not. uh, the our comprehensive exam process is much more a collaborative process between our mentors and ourselves, and so the university, the seminary, has established requirements for the students must meet these certain comprehensive learning objectives, right? Of course, it's Old Testament based for the Old Testament group, New Testament based for the New Testament group. But the mentor is made aware of these requirements, and working with the student, they determine how to demonstrate that the student is proficient in and meeting these requirements. So it's much less, I'll say, intimidating than sitting at a table taking a timed test with no resources, which may prove you're a very good test taker or something. But I mean, that's the standard educational way of doing these kind of controlled tests, right? Whether it's the GRE or the SAT, or, sit you at a table, tell me everything you know, fill in the blank, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I appreciate that Columbia Biblical Seminary is taking a kind of a different route on this, and it's up to the mentor to yay or nay whether you've met the comprehensive requirements or not.
Hey, let me just interrupt the flow of the conversation here, just to encourage you, if you can get value out of this, if this is answering questions or helping you think about things that you've never really thought about before, whatever it might happen to be, could you hit the like button for us? It really helps the YouTube algorithm, and it helps these videos be found by more people. So you're really helping us as you do this, and we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for hitting the like button. Well, let's get back to it. Yeah. Okay, good. That sounds quite nice, really. And what about, so that's, yeah, I don't know if I would have preferred that or not. I did okay. For us, those exams are just pass-fail. So it wasn't about getting a grade. It was just about, do you know enough to be able to get by? I did better with my spirituality part than I did with my counseling part, ironically, just because of the nature of the questions, I think. There were kind of difficult questions. It had been probably 2 years since I'd looked at that material because, well, you try and prep for it for the exam, but it was books that I'd read about 2 years ago that they were referring to in those questions, and so I was a little bit rusty on them. So anyway, no, that's good. Finally, just in terms of process of getting a PhD, there's the colloquiums, and what we'll do is we'll talk about the dissertation in a moment, and that might be part of another video. But let's talk about the colloquiums as well. What is a colloquium, and how does that work?
Well, we really just had the seminars, not so much a colloquium, but we had the seminars. We met, our cohort met online, met together every week. The first seminar that we go through is basically researching into biblical studies, how to research biblical studies, and so that's the first seminar. It's a full semester. And there's several papers that are written, and you're encouraged to write those papers with the view of your dissertation topic, in there. The next seminar taken then is a learning methods seminar, which I really appreciated, not coming from an educational background, but coming from a tech background. I'll say the program recognizes that at a PhD level, you may be tasked to teach. And unless they give you some of these tools and methodologies of teaching at that level, you may be lost. You may not know what to do if you did get a teaching job. So that learning methods class I found particularly valuable. It was all brand new information to me, and I learned a whole lot about education that I did not know before, because I'd never been an educator.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, so for us, we had some required seminars that we had to take, and one of them was teaching in higher education, which did exactly the same thing, walk through the education process, how they works, philosophy of education, philosophy of Christian education, different approaches, and we had a bunch of books to read for those classes as well. So we had, I think, two required classes covering those kinds of things, plus that empirical research class that I had to do as well instead of a language. So that covered off a lot of that research and teaching kinds of things as well. Yeah, so we had colloquiums in addition to the seminars, and the colloquiums were really, it was oriented around your major, but it was really where all the people going through that doctoral major would meet together and we would just cover a topic together with the head of department. In fact, it was with the whole faculty of the department. The idea was anyway, so that essentially we could do something like neuropsychology and biblical counseling, for instance. So we would read, some books on neuropsychology, or just maybe we'd pick one book each, and then we'd have one required book. And so, like, I remember that particular one, for instance, I think I did Fear, I think it was, and I read a book on neuropsychology, neuropsychologist book on fear, and then we had, I think, a book on emotions that went with that, maybe, I can't remember. So there was required reading for it, and then there was an additional book. No papers, oh no, there was papers required as well, so we had to respond to the books. And then there was, the colloquiums were always like, because they're always on site, they're normally only 2 days, but they are reasonably intense. So you're having a discussion, you're being evaluated on that discussion, your contribution to the discussion, plus there's normally reading to do after each day's discussion. Maybe it's 3 days, I can't remember now. And so those were, you get together as a group, you know each other, you want to go hang out, and you got to go read papers and books and write stuff, and it was a pain. But it was great. It was still good learning experience. So we had those in addition to the seminars we had. So we'd have 2 seminars each semester plus the colloquium. And the colloquium, there was required reading for that and writing for it as well. And of course, that was the one you left to the last minute because it was a little bit smaller than the others. So it sounds like the way yours worked was that it was more about the writing process and how to do that separately as a group, as a cohort. So
right, there's an expectation in my program that you've already completed really a lot of that work already as far as biblical studies. You're coming in with a Master of Divinity, or you're coming in with a Master of Arts, or both, or a THM. You could be coming in with a Master of Theology. You've already done that kind of academic level work. And so they're not rehashing, we didn't have to take another class in Genesis or another class in Job, or, because we'd already done that at our graduate level. You're coming in, and the focus from day one is preparing to do your dissertation. So the program, much like the European program, is really focused on, let's set some groundwork for how to do biblical studies, how to do and prepare you for the dissertation. Then you get the educational side, and then from as far as teaching methods, and then you move into the final class. This final seminar is the proposal class, where you spend the semester working with your classmates, getting your formal proposal in place to submit before you proceed down the actual path of researching and writing your dissertation. Yeah. And at that point, you get a lot of that collaboration that you mentioned earlier in the colloquium. This is where we and my cohort mates got a lot of collaboration as to how to refine our topics and state better what we're looking to do and how we're looking to do it, and setting up essentially a roadmap for the dissertation. So by the time the proposal is finished, it's not just a proposal, but it's also a map of, this is what I'm going to study each of the coming semesters as I research and write and that kind of thing. So it really does, it seems more abbreviated than perhaps your program, but in my opinion, I was not any less prepared to start the research and dissertation stage.
So if you've been thinking about a PhD, or if you've ever wondered what's involved in a PhD, I hope this has been helpful. I would love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on a level going through education to this level? I'd love to hear from you. Do you think this is a crazy idea, a silly idea? Maybe it's right for some people, but not right for you. Maybe it's completely unnecessary. I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below. And I look forward to hearing, particularly those of you who think that the education system is completely broken and none of this is necessary. And people with a doctorate really don't know what they're talking about. I'd love to hear that below. Leave a comment. I look forward to hearing from you there. I'm not even being silly. I know there are people out there who believe that, right? So I'd love to hear from you as well. But you don't have to do a PhD if you're interested in Greek and Hebrew. Frank and I teach Greek and Hebrew. That's what we do. If you're interested in learning Greek or Hebrew, go grab our starter pack at bma.to/starterpack, and we look forward to being a blessing to you and serving you there. If you've gotten value out of this video, we'd really appreciate if you hit the like button. That really helps this video out, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next video. We'll see you then.